Hi everyone, my name's Jorge. We're here at the Electrobit offices in Berlin, where I will have a chance to speak to two experts about the software-defined vehicle and how we can achieve that dream through open collaboration, specifically through the open source software that we can build. Here they are, Isaac and Michael. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Jorge.
Hey,
Hey, how are you guys?
good. What about you?
Great to hear, great to hear. So one of the first things I really wanted to get to know is a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get to become those experts in SDV, open collaboration, open source software? Michael, a little bit about you, that would be great.
So yeah, I'm a physicist by profession, and then at some point in time I started training a team of football-playing robots. And then, let's say, global competition where the goal is to build a team of robots playing against the human soccer in 2050.
Great.
After that, I joined Electrobit for a couple of years, being responsible for stuff like AutoSign, OSEC, business development. I headed the Electrobit offices in China for about 3 years. And then I joined Alibaba, Alibaba Cloud, so I have a certain impact on insight in the Chinese market into how hyperscalers are active. Before I finally joined the Eclipse Foundation, being responsible for the ecosystem development over there.
So different touch points, so a lot of information probably in there. Isaac, what about you?
Yeah, so I got into the automotive industry in 1996 in grad school in the US, and then came over to Germany and was with BMW for a lot of years, and then got in, whilst with BMW, into the cockpit area, so navigation, infotainment, dealing with new telematic services like traffic data and things like this. And then, there you really start getting involved in open source when you deal, and especially then Android started coming along, and I made a switch over to Open Synergy here in Berlin, and really started dealing with mainly Android, and then came to Electrobit, last year, and since then being involved with our Linux as well as our hypervisor, which are both open source. Then I really, took the plunge for good at that point.
Right. So speaking a little bit more about this collaborative effort that is open source software, earlier this year, the Harvard Business School published a working paper where they kind of estimated the value of open source, or they said on the supply side, so what it would cost to build the open source software pieces around the world if we had to start from scratch. And they kind of estimated that value at around 4 billion euros. But on the demand side, so if we're talking about the different enterprises or private entities that need open source software, if it didn't exist, if they had to build them themselves, how much would it cost for them to rewrite every single piece of that open source software? And the number is a little bit bigger. It's around 8 trillion euros. So those numbers are just baffling to me. So could you guys give me a little bit of perspective of how much value is this collaborative effort of open source software? How is it adding so much to these processes and these business models? Michael, you first, probably.
What we see quite often is that in the very initial phase, so there was maybe the very first phase where people started just out of a certain philosophy to work together and provide their work results for free. But then we entered into a phase where we saw more organizations talking about commoditization of certain aspects, right? Operating systems, Apache web servers, and other things. So just by identifying that maybe the prevailing business model is not selling software, but maybe offering service around software, but having a platform ecosystem which enables other business cases, was one of the main drivers where I think that organizations and people understood that collaborating, building commoditized software components is a good starting point. And we see a lot of things nowadays, maybe the internet infrastructure and other things really being based on this one.
Okay.
Then we saw maybe a little bit more advanced things, which are more into innovation, like cloud stuff, Kubernetes and other things, where really open source collaboration drive new business cases. And even sometimes we see open source being used as a strategic weapon. So it's not always that open source is good. You can also use open source in a kind of fight with competitors, for example. Everything coming together finally ends up in the situation to describe that the overall value is perceived as 8 trillion something.
8 trillion, yeah. So that, according to the estimation. I mean, it sounds like, yes, we have to level set everything, and then we can differentiate and compete with each other on top of that. Isaac, is that what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the example of Electrobit, I mean, really, with our Linux offering, if we had to make that Linux, it would be so much effort. But what we do, and this is a paradigm you see pretty often, is just taking what is there, this huge thing, and adapting it to the needs of your industry, right? So this thing, is a really good fit with the industry, but it's not an exact fit, right? And you need to like take your file and adjust it so it fits in that keyhole, right? So in our example, it's really about having this, open source piece, this huge open source piece, be able to adhere to automotive safety standards, right? So, which is a little piece. So basically, as Michael said, adding add-on services to this open source software, that's exactly what we did. We took this huge thing, so much value, and we put, this much value on top, and now all of a sudden we have something that, we can offer to the industry.
Right. And speaking a little bit more specifically about the automotive industry, like one of the biggest things we need in the automotive industry is safety and security. We need to make sure that the people inside the vehicle are safe, that nothing happens to them. And we also need to ensure there's no external threats that are actually getting in there. So how is the open source collaboration happening to help us get to functional safety or making sure that our cybersecurity is getting there?
Well, I think you're interesting way of phrasing it, and it seems you're mixing up different phases, at least how I see them, right? We started maybe 20 years with a clear denial phase. We can't use open source for compliance reasons. Right. Then we started with adopters or usage perspective. We take maybe this library and that library because it's convenient to use. It's not in the core of what we are doing. But what we see now in the recent years is more and more contributions from the automotive industry to open source projects. And you see that many companies have released open source manifestos where they actually claim if we do something which is non-differentiating for us, we do not do it by ourselves in a proprietary way. We first check if there's maybe some collaboration in open source. So we see that the value, the perceived value of open source and open collaboration in the automotive industry has increased, also driven for sure by the complexity of challenges which currently coming from the outside to the automotive industry.
And just a little bit there, I've run some research, both qualitative and quantitative, to see, is there value in open source? And yes, there is. But I've also ask the other question. Are you collaborating in projects that are open source? Are you contributing to libraries? And around half of the respondents said, not really, I'm not really there just yet. So even though, yes, they all value it, it's kind of limited in scope. So Isaac, in your case, like what can we do to get that other half involved in these collaborative efforts?
First of all, I think it's important, first of all, because one of the advantages of open source and the collaboration is not just that you get a volume of work done, you get a lot done, but you get a diversity of needs and problem solving flowing into the open source, because you have a lot of companies doing it, right? If you have one company working on a piece of software, they're going to solve their problems and it's going to serve their needs. But if you have a zillion companies, collaborating on a piece of software, then each one will have different pain points, different needs, and so they're going to contribute things that will meet their needs, and then you have a whole bunch of tools to solve a whole bunch of problems, right? So it's not just about getting a lot of work done, it's about getting diversity. I mean, an example there is we took Linux and the init system in Linux, systemd didn't really meet the needs of embedded automotive. So we created our own called Crinic and then gave that back to the community. So, it's just a problem we had, we solved it, and then you have a million companies doing that, and then you have a million tools to solve a million problems, which you wouldn't have with proprietary software being done by one company.
But maybe giving back is part of the deal. I think that's for a couple of organizations. I think you said 50%. For what we see, it's more than 20% are actively contributing back towards what they use, and maybe about 80% of the companies. The interesting thing, and that's because you started with that point, right? When we talk to these organizations, they say, we can get it for free. Why should I engage? Or why should I support developers with money, even if they can't contribute because they have own developers? The problem is, the challenge I give them is usually assume that the stuff you're using is at one day not any longer available. So you would need to build them by yourself if you still want to offer your product, right? And then you have a big problem. So in the worst case scenario, you have a huge problem. So it's maybe better to spend a little bit of that money you would need to re-implement everything by yourself, just to keep that community, that ecosystem sustainable. It's not so successful. It could hopefully much more successful, but it is what it is. If you give away something for free, we will always have organizations who just use it without contributing back. I think more responsible organizations which better understand the value of open source and the value of open collaboration, at some point they clearly say it's valuable for us even to contribute back, because this will build a sustainable ecosystem. I can build my product on that sustainable ecosystem.
Right. So this sense of collaborating in order to get adoption is kind of the point here. It sounds like we need to dig a little bit deeper on that. So why don't we go over there and talk a little bit more?
Sure.
So digging a little deeper into this topic of, well, how do we get solutions for the automotive industry around here? Like, what am I missing here? How is this collaborative effort of specifically using open source software? What's missing for it to actually happen, get more adoption? My hope.
If you think about this, for me, there are three pillars. The one is a licensing scheme, and that's open source. Then there's a collaboration scheme. So what are the rules under which different companies can come together and work together? And the third pillar is the contribution scheme. So what happens with my contribution? Do I keep some of the rights on my contribution? Have I to transfer all the rights of my contribution to someone else, for example? And these three pillars, depending on how they are settled, come to different solutions. I'm not saying that the one is better than the other, it's just different. And you need to make sure that you understand the implications by that.
Right. And Isaac, in your case, like talking to different types of customers, like what are you seeing there? Like what's happening with that intent to collaborate or lack thereof?
I think the intent to collaborate is there. You know, I saw in my last life with Open Synergy, we were working on a VirtIO implementation for automotive, right? And we would need to create new devices, like a way to share audio between virtual machines on a system. And when patches got submitted to the mailing list or implementations, there was always a lot of feedback. And so the collaboration seems to work fairly well, even if not everybody's collaborating. But when you collaborate, when you give to the community, you also get back. So if you do something yourself and keep it for yourself, fine. But if you give it to the community is going to give you feedback and help you make it better. So what's going to come out is going to be better in the end. Maybe as far as adoption of open source, the main blocker that I'm seeing is that open source came a little bit late to the game in our industry as far as software. So proprietary solutions in certain areas have, are already entrenched and established, and just pivoting from something that is entrenched and established to something else is very difficult in an industry where you have, project life cycles. The production starts on this date, and any delay costs a lot of money, where if you have issues in the field, it's not like a desktop computer or enterprise computer where you can easily just fix it right there. You have all kinds of problems. So it's very difficult to pivot from one software to another in an industry like ours.
But for me personally, that's exactly one of the reasons why the automotive industry faces the challenges they face right now, because everyone has his own silo. And it turns out that these silos getting more and more complex, number of variants, complexity to maintain. And if you think about a software stack, there's a major part inside the software stack which is non-differentiating, which is not adding value. But if each one in the silo is maintaining his own silo, that's a huge amount of money which is wasted because it does not add value to the final product.
Right. So if there could be a way for everybody to agree that this is the undifferentiated stack, programs, whatever, platform, and then, go compete here. This is where you can do that. Like, that would be probably a better way forward.
We see this in cloud happening, right? It's not that this is we see significant markets with multi-billion revenue where this collaboration model just works. I think nobody would claim that the cloud hyperscalers do not earn money. So obviously there are areas where the problem is there's legacy. And that's something all the way I see the biggest challenge. I talked about the open source manifestos, and what we see right now, organizations saying, hey, now we are doing open source, here is my source code. But that's the wrong attitude. I phrase it different. That's the first discipline to master, to contribute and to give back to the community. The second discipline to master, and that's maybe the more challenging one, is this to overcome this not invented here syndrome. So you can use my software, but I'm not willing to take your software. And if everyone from the silo starts to say, hey, here's my software, use it. But when we have 18 different softwares, but nobody start to pick up the software from other parties, even open source cannot help. So it's a paradigm shift on how we develop software and how we can how we are maybe able to overcome this not invented here syndrome.
Right. So, I mean, I know how this works. I don't know really how that works. I'll stick here for a bit because I think I can get to the SDV using what I already know, these legacy systems, these legacy cycles that I already know how to run. But at some point, it might take a little bit longer. So I guess to wrap up, my question is, what should I be on the lookout for? What kind of industry trend, what kind of signal from different enterprises should I be looking for to say like, oh, the future, the SDV is almost here, or better yet, the SDV is here?
I personally can only talk about the perspective of the Eclipse SDV, Software Defined Vehicle Working Group. What we see right now, so we are now up and running for 2.5 years, starting with a new paradigm of code first, working together on implementation, not on specification, as many other collaboration efforts in the past. And what we see right now is after testing for the first 2.5 years, we now see that the ecosystem is getting more serious. So we talk not just about technology, we also talk about how a supply chain needs to look like. We start discussion with purchasing and legal departments about liability in such a supply chain, how safety can kick in such a supply chain. So we have a lot of non-technical requirements and features we start to discuss. And that's a sign for me that we are onto something which is way more than just jointly building software and source code.
Right, makes sense. Isaac,
from my point of view, really seeing the signs, it's just the interest from the industry to want to have, open source solutions. It's not only they're not only putting open source manifests out there, they're calling us on the phone and saying, hey, let's do it, right? And the reluctance, even though the entrenched solutions are proved to work, and if you use some proprietary solutions, you're absolutely beholden to that company. And if they want to do something, or if you want to do something and they don't want to do it, then it's not going to get done. Whereas open source, you could say, hey, community, let's do it. You start contributing, everyone gets on it, and there it is, right? So it's really, the signs are there, the interest is there.
So like the SDV is going to arrive when different perspectives, different profiles, like different interests have aligned enough where like legal, finance, but also from the technical side, like yes, this is probably going to get us there quicker than any other type of approach.
I also see a geographic component to it. So the Chinese are essentially, they are kind of, their auto industry is now starting from scratch.
Sure.
Let's say, for not very long compared to here in Europe. And so they are basically just taking the solutions that are the best solutions at the time, not really worried about legacy, right? So you see what they're doing, they're just picking the best solution. So then you see what those solutions are.
There's already a counterfactual.
Because I should mention this as well. For me, with the 7 years in China with Chinese organizations, the Chinese developer is willing to give up his own approach if you see that something else is better and bringing it more fast to the target. In Europe, I still have the feeling that the concept of that something could be better or faster, it's not developed by me, that's not even a valid concept for a lot of developers. So I think we need to get more into this agile thing and accepting that others may have good code as well. And we need more getting into collecting the best code artifacts instead of always assuming that I'm the only one who can write this best code artifacts.
Right. So like a compelling value proposition takes one form in one region, takes another form in another. But at the end of the day, it's still, I have to provide a compelling value proposition to make that shift. Thank you both for being here. I learned a lot, and thank you guys for being here as well. Have a great day.